Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight into one of history's absolute earliest and honestly most fascinating examples of macroeconomic foresight and crisis management, long before modern economic theory was a thing and way before global supply chain analytics. An ancient civilization faced a literal existential threat that could have wiped them completely off the map. Today, we're going to examine exactly how a terrifying vision transformed into a total masterclass in national survival, policy planning, and leadership.
Okay, let's dive into this because our source material sets an incredibly tense scene. Picture this. You're the absolute ruler of the known world, the Pharaoh of Egypt, and out of nowhere, your mind is plagued by these vivid, deeply unsettling visions that just shake you to your core. We aren't just talking about bad dreams here. These are persistent, terrifying omens that leave the most powerful man on earth feeling entirely powerless. The security of a whole empire is suddenly hanging in the balance of a riddle locked inside the mind of one troubled ruler.
So, Part 1, Pharaoh's Two Bizarre Dreams. Now it had been 2 full years of relative quiet before these disturbing visions suddenly arrived to completely shatter the peace of the palace. And you've got to notice the striking, almost cannibalistic similarities between the two dreams. In the first one, Pharaoh is standing by the river. 7 fat, healthy cows come up to feed in a meadow. But then 7 incredibly lean, ill-favored cows emerge and just devour the fat ones. And the truly terrifying part? After eating them, they look just as starving and horrific as before. Literally 0 calories gained. Pharaoh wakes up in a sweat, falls back asleep, and boom, it happens again. This time with agriculture. 7 plump, good ears of corn are devoured by 7 thin ears that have been blasted by the east wind. It's vivid, it's chaotic, and it's deeply unnatural. Morning rolls around and Pharaoh's spirit is, as you'd expect, deeply troubled. So he does what any ancient king would do in this situation. He calls in the experts. He summons all the magicians and all the wise men of Egypt. He tells them these incredibly detailed dreams. But crickets, total silence. Not a single one of Egypt's greatest minds can interpret them. You can practically feel the suspense and agitation building in the royal court. The nation is facing this massive, unspoken existential problem, and the absolute best experts in the land are entirely stumped.
Moving on to Section 2, Joseph the Dream Interpreter.
Right at this peak of absolute royal frustration, there's a sudden pivot. The chief butler, who's standing right there in the court, suddenly remembers a massive oversight from his own past. He confesses his fault to Pharaoh, remembering a time when he and the chief baker were thrown into the royal prison. While they were locked up, they both had dreams, and the young Hebrew servant to the captain of the guard correctly interpreted them both, exactly as the events later played out. Desperate for answers, Pharaoh doesn't even hesitate. A forgotten prisoner named Joseph is suddenly thrust straight into the spotlight. The text tells us they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. He is quickly shaved, his prison clothes are swapped for proper raiment, and he is rushed directly into the presence of the Pharaoh.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the profound humility Joseph displays the very second he stands before the most powerful man on earth. Pharaoh looks at this former prisoner and essentially says, "I have heard that you can understand a dream to interpret it." Now, Joseph could have easily used this moment to negotiate his freedom, to boast, or to leverage some power. Instead, his immediate response is, "It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace." It's just a striking moment of clarity and total ego removal right before his massive promotion.
Which brings us to Section 3, Predicting the Economic Crisis.
Okay, so once Pharaoh recounts all that terrifying imagery of the cannibalistic cows and the blasted corn, we pivot hard. We move from a realm of mystical, troubling dreams straight into hardcore practical strategy. The very first thing Joseph tells Pharaoh completely shifts the paradigm. He says, the dream of Pharaoh is one. Those 2 bizarre dreams, they aren't separate events at all. They represent the exact same impending reality for Egypt. And the reason the dream was doubled, given twice in one night, is because the thing is firmly established by God and it is going to happen very shortly. The clock is literally already ticking. Here is the terrifying 14-year cycle that Joseph reveals. First, there will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. The earth is going to bring forth food by the handfuls. But, and it's a huge but, immediately following that, there will arise 7 years of a famine so severe, so grievous, that all the previous plenty will be completely forgotten. The famine will literally consume the land, exactly like those thin cows consumed the fat ones. The abundance won't even be known anymore because the devastation following it will be just absolute. So, I want you to really think about this for a second. Put yourself in their shoes. How do you prepare an entire civilization for a 7-year total agricultural collapse? This is the massive macroeconomic question facing Egypt. If they do nothing, the nation dies. It's that simple. But Joseph doesn't just drop a doomsday prophecy on the pharaoh's lap and walk away. He instantly follows it up with a brilliantly structured solution. Joseph pitches a concrete survival blueprint, an actionable policy proposal to literally save the nation. Step 1. Pharaoh needs to find a discreet and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt, basically a crisis manager with absolute authority. Step 2. Appoint officers across the land to manage all the complex logistics. Step 3. Aggressively gather all the food during the good years and physically lay up corn and secure storehouses within the cities, right under Pharaoh's direct control. So the crucial point is the specific math behind Joseph's policy. He advises Pharaoh to take up a fifth part, exactly 20% of the land of Egypt's produce during those 7 plenteous years. This is a massive, highly disciplined national savings rate. By taxing or reserving exactly 1/5 of the bumper crops over 7 years, Egypt will build a strategic food reserve, large enough to ensure that the land absolutely does not perish when those 7 years of famine finally hit.
That takes us to Section 4, the ultimate promotion. The sheer competence of this plan just completely stuns the royal court. I mean, they transition from absolute panic to sheer purpose, and we see Pharaoh's decisive reaction to this incredible crisis management proposal. The text tells us that the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Pharaoh looks around at his court and asks, "Can we find such a one as this is? A man in whom the Spirit of God is?" It is total, unprecedented buy-in. Pharaoh recognizes instantly that this 30-year-old former prisoner standing right in front of him isn't just some fortune teller. He is uniquely, fundamentally qualified to lead the nation through the dark times ahead.
Talk about a sudden character arc, right? In a single day, Joseph goes from sitting in a literal dungeon to becoming the second most powerful man in the world. Pharaoh places him over his own house and over all the land of Egypt. He takes his own signet ring right off his hand and puts it on Joseph's, arraying him in fine linen and a solid gold chain. He has Joseph ride in the second chariot with people crying out, "Bow the knee," before him. Pharaoh even renames him Zaphnath-Paneah and gives him a high-ranking wife, Asenath, the daughter of the priest of On. Basically, without Joseph, no man in Egypt is allowed to lift a hand or a foot.
And finally, Section 5, executing the master plan.
So let's leave the palace behind for a minute and get into the calm, methodical execution phase during those 7 years of plenty. It stands in such stark contrast to the chaotic nightmare that kicked off this whole story. Joseph gets right to work. He goes out from the presence of Pharaoh and travels throughout all the land of Egypt. And, exactly as predicted, the earth brings forth food by the handfuls. Joseph executes that 20% reserve strategy flawlessly. He gathers up the food of the field round about every city and lays it up securely inside the cities. The scale of this agricultural surplus is almost unimaginable. The text says Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. He literally broke their ancient accounting systems because the surplus was just so vast. And this setup brilliantly illustrates exactly why all that aggressive preparation was so absolutely necessary. Because, as promised, eventually those 7 years of plenteousness ended and the dearth began. On one side you have Egypt, on the other, literally all surrounding lands. The dearth was everywhere, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When the Egyptians finally felt the famished pinch and cried to Pharaoh, his answer was incredibly simple. "Go unto Joseph. What he saith to you, do." Joseph's incredible foresight was completely and globally validated. At the absolute peak of the crisis, when the famine was just devastating the whole face of the earth, Egypt was ready. Joseph simply opens all the storehouses he had spent the last 7 years filling, and he starts selling corn to the Egyptians. And it wasn't just domestic survival either. Because the famine was so sore in all lands, all the surrounding countries came into Egypt to Joseph to buy corn. The crisis was actively and successfully managed, all because Pharaoh had the wisdom to delegate absolute authority to a man with a proven, highly structured plan.
Which brings us to our final thought today. Joseph's story isn't just some historical trivia, right? It's a timeless blueprint for resilience. If a civilization's ultimate survival depends on aggressively preparing for a massive crisis before it even begins to happen, during the times of plenty, what 7 years of famine are we failing to prepare for today? Whether we're talking about our personal finances, our businesses, or our global infrastructure, the lesson of the Pharaoh's dreams remains absolutely true. The time to build your storehouses is when the harvest is good.
Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you eager to reflect on how you're managing the years of plenty in your own life.